Rise up, live joy your way. From emotional intelligence through cognitive distortions, certified life and wellness coach Kamini Wood is on a mission to help people see the magnificence of their own unique human spirit. Through these small bites of self-visualization and self-confidence, you can have healthy relationships, success in business and career, and live the life you want to live. Rise up, live joy your way.
Hi there, and welcome to another episode of Rise Up, Live Joy Your Way, whether it's morning, afternoon, or evening. Thank you for taking some time to spend with me. And I want to talk about a subject that actually I think impacts a lot of us. Definitely has impacted me and still rears its ugly head, and that's the concept of people pleasing. So question for you. Have you ever found yourself consistently saying yes when you actually want to say no? Or do you find yourself prioritizing everyone else's happiness over your own? Research suggests that people-pleasing behaviors are actually more widespread than we may think, and it's very common amongst high-achieving and also empathetic people. So I want to unpack today together with you not only the psychology behind people-pleasing, but why it becomes such an ingrained habit, and then of course, how do we shift out of it? I want to say it's not a one-and-done thing. I think this is something that I think we continue to work on, or at least for me, I have to continue to work on it. So the very first thing that I want to start with is just really sort of defining what people-pleasing is from a psychological perspective. Because I think people-pleasing, sometimes we lose track of what it actually means. So people-pleasing refers to this consistent, or we can even say persistent, tendency to prioritize other people's needs, desires, opinions over your own. And oftentimes it is at the expense of your own well-being, or maybe even your own authenticity. And psychologists explain that people-pleasing typically emerges from a combination of social conditioning, our own personality traits, such as having high empathy or agreeableness, and it can also stem from a deeper-seated fear of rejection or conflict, or just also the need to be accepted and to belong. According to the author of Disease to Please, chronic people pleasers often find subconsciously they believe that their worth is directly tied to gaining approval or avoiding disapproval. The author actually emphasizes that while wanting to help or please others is a natural, and it's actually a positive thing, that when we chronically people please, that's when it becomes harmful. I often will say when I over-rotate into my empathy, that's when the people-pleasing comes online, and it usually means that I'm losing track of my own self in the efforts of making sure someone else is okay. And oftentimes, the author also does say that it's driven by anxiety or fear rather than genuinely wanting to do something. So from a neuroscience perspective, people-pleasing behaviors generally activate reward pathways in the brain associated with receiving that approval or that praise. And neuroimaging research that was published in Social, Cognitive, and Affective Neuroscience found that individuals who habitually seek approval demonstrate these heightened activity in their brain areas when they anticipate social approval. So this neurological activation reinforces those people-pleasing behaviors and why it makes it more difficult to change. The other thing I want to say is that attachment theory has also shed some light on these people-pleasing tendencies. So individuals who develop a more insecure attachment style or even an anxious attachment style during childhood will often rely excessively on that external validation. And so and that external validation actually increases their self-worth. So psychologist Dr. Sue Johnson actually had highlighted how these attachment patterns will fuel the need for external reassurance, and then that drives the chronic people-pleasing behaviors because that's how they get their self-worth. They feel more worthy. Cognitive behavioral perspectives offer the thought that people pleasers often have those distorted thinking patterns. So again, and I mentioned this before in another episode, but they're referred to as cognitive distortions, which is just they're cognitive, it's almost like different ways of looking at things. So catastrophizing, right? If I say no to this, the relationship will fall apart. So people pleasers will naturally catastrophize, and they'll think to themselves, if they don't do X for somebody, then that person is going to dislike them forever and then they're never going to have that relationship anymore. Or they personalize something. If I disappoint somebody, then they're a bad person. So those cognitive distortions will continue to build that pattern of people-pleasing habits because they increase anxiety around setting boundaries or expressing what you do or don't want to do. And it's just important to understand from a scientific perspective or a psychological perspective where that might be coming from, because it's more deeply rooted. And what happens is it's rooted in some limiting beliefs. And so it's not to shame yourself or to say that I failed in some way. It's just to really create some understanding around it. And so, once we have that understanding, then we can start to take steps towards how do we start to break down the pattern of people pleasing. So the very first thing that I would say is that one of the most important things that I learned was boundary setting skills. Research routinely suggests that boundary setting is essential to start overcoming people pleasing. And Brené Brown, her research on vulnerability and authenticity emphasizes that clear boundaries actually increase your empathy and compassion and help build genuine relationships because you're reducing resentment and anxiety. So by practicing saying no firmly, but also respectfully in these low stakes situations first, that can gradually increase your comfort with it. As I like to say, it builds the muscle, right? It builds the muscle of learning to say no. So you do it in these low stakes situations and you gradually increase it into what you would consider more high stakes. But when you do it in the low stakes situations, it'll build your confidence that you can say no or that you can set some boundaries of what works for you and what doesn't. The second thing that we can utilize in order to break down these people-pleasing behaviors are cognitive reframing your thought patterns. So changing some of those distorted thought patterns. For example, if there's the catastrophic thinking that if I say no to this, then this person will no longer be friends with me or will no longer be in relationship with me, we can shift that into, people who genuinely respect me are going to understand that I can't do this or I have these boundaries. But just being able to regularly reframe will reduce the anxiety around not just boundary setting, but also, just being able to speak up for yourself. Of course, there's self-compassion, which I routinely go back to. Dr. Kristen Neff is the main researcher on self-compassion, and it's incredibly effective for people who are overcoming people-pleasing tendencies, because what self-compassion teaches us is that we need to lean into kindness over judgment, kindness, understanding, and acceptance. So if we practice these affirmations rooted in self-compassion, so for instance, my worth isn't defined by other people's approval, or it's okay for me to put my needs first. We routinely practice those. They will gradually start to reshape how our brain sees saying no to somebody or not necessarily overgiving or overfunctioning. And then, of course, we have mindfulness techniques. Mindfulness is about how we come back to the present moment. So if we find ourselves routinely in this people-pleasing behavior, mindfulness-based stress reduction studies have actually indicated that these practices can help us emotionally regulate and just help us become more self-aware. And so when we are more self-aware and we're more regulated, we can slow down and pay attention to whether we actually want to say yes to something or we actually want to do something versus just being in that habit of continually people-pleasing and doing for others. So you can even set daily reminders to check in with yourself, and ask yourself, am I choosing to do this because I actually genuinely want to do it, or am I choosing to do it out of fear or obligation? And just increasing your awareness will disrupt that automatic pattern of people-pleasing. I just want to really emphasize, though, that stepping away from people-pleasing isn't selfish. And I offer that because I do think that sometimes when people are used to us people-pleasing or over-functioning, they're going to have a reaction when we start taking steps to reduce that. And for some people, they're not going to like it. And they may even call you selfish. And it's important to remind yourself that you no longer over-functioning is actually not a selfish act at all. It's a self-full act, and it's actually an act towards having healthier relationships with the people in your life. And you do deserve to be fully seen and heard and respected. And you don't need to be driven by the need to please or feeling that you're, overfunctioning is where you get your worth from. So just reclaiming your voice and reclaiming yourself is so absolutely important. And if you'd like to talk about how coaching can support you on that, especially if you find yourself in this pattern of people pleasing, feel free to book a time with me anytime at coachwithkamini.com. And until next time, stay well.
Thank you for listening to Rise Up, Live Joy Your Way. For more information, book a chat with Kamini at www.chatwithkamini.com or visit her website at www.kaminiwood.com. You can also find Kamini on Facebook or Instagram. Username It's Authentic Me. Thank you for listening.